And if time allows at the end, we are going to try to respond to everyone. So to begin our session today, I'd like to invite Jeffrey Sachs, the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, to provide some opening remarks. Professor Sachs.
David, thank you so much. And thanks to Ilaria Capua for her wonderful book, Circular Health, and for enabling us to get together to put COVID-19 in a broader context of a world that is destabilized by human activity and suffering multiple ramifications of that destabilization, including the current pandemic, but also the devastations that we're simultaneously experiencing from climate change and from many other environmental and social ills. Circular Health is a wonderful read, so I know we're going to have fun discussing it because it is a dialogue as a great classic literary form, but a dialogue that takes us from the start of thinking about human health back to ancient Greece, back to Hippocrates and Galen. So more than 2 millennia ago, where the idea that ill health is the result of imbalances in the environment, resulting in imbalances in our bodily systems, was first hypothesized. And in Ilaria's wonderful hands, this becomes both a starting point for deep reflections on our current circumstances and for a wonderful, quick history of understanding of natural balances, including what took 1,500 years to clearly hypothesize and almost 2,000 years to prove the existence of unseen microorganisms, pathogens, bacteria, protists, viruses that were causative agents of human illness and that were transmitted to human populations in complex environmental manners that were poorly understood, whether directly from animals in so-called zoonotic events where we have shared pathogens with animal populations basically since the beginning of agriculture itself 10,000 years ago, or through vectors that carry these diseases. And Ilaria discusses how the complex life cycle of the mosquito was painstakingly understood, including by Grassi and Ross and others who deciphered this incredibly complex and fascinating life cycle, or through destabilization of the physical environment through water supply. And she recounts John Snow's detective work in understanding the cholera epidemic in London and tracing the epidemic to a part of the water supply and famously removing the hand pump, and stopping the cholera epidemic. But even then, not finding support among fellow public health officials of the day. And one of the things that Ilaria recounts always is how hard the breakthrough thinking is, and how interconnected the web of knowledge is throughout history in order to be able to make the breakthroughs. She introduces a category called NL. I won't reveal what it is because you have to read the book to know what it is. You can guess along the way, but it's a kind of thinking that we need to think more broadly about the nature of health and disease, and it requires creativity that moves beyond narrow siloed thinking is the most important message. And whether it was Hippocrates and Galen, or Vesalius, or Snow, Ross, and Grassi, or Pasteur and Koch, or the other geniuses that helped us to understand this basic sense of destabilizing natural balances and complex transmission pathways of pathogenic disease. It's required reaching beyond one's narrow silo in an interconnected way. And I think that that brings us to COVID-19 in a very compelling way, because to understand COVID-19, of course, we have to understand some very specific issues of pathophysiology. We have to understand the specifics of human-to-human transmission. We have to understand potential pathways for therapeutics and vaccines and how they can be developed, and the core activities of the World Bank about how they're going to get into how new vaccines and therapeutics are going to reach people who desperately need those, but otherwise might not have the incomes or access to new breakthroughs. But we also need to understand more fundamentally, where did this disease come from and how? Well, I think while there has been first, we don't know the answer fully to that question. I think it is right to say there has been a conspiracy view, if I might say so, that this is the result of machinations in a laboratory in Wuhan. But my guess is, based on the overwhelming literature, the peer-reviewed studies, and the logic of the situation, that what we're experiencing is not some machination, as a conspiracy theorist would put it, but actually another natural event of destabilizing nature, leading to zoonotic transmission of a long existing virus, in this case probably from a horseshoe bat, maybe to an intermediate mammalian host, but possibly directly from a bat to a human population, probably in southwestern China, probably not in Wuhan or anywhere close, maybe not even this year, maybe years and years ago. We'll find out when we review blood samples of patients from hospital freezers in the coming months and years. But a natural zoonotic event, like other emerging diseases, and therefore in a category of increasingly frequent hazards that are hitting humanity, because COVID-19 is a part of a wave of such events, it would seem. SARS, of course, is a precursor, also a coronavirus from a bat population in southwest China. We have Nipah virus. We have the H1N1 recombinant pandemic of 2009 to 2010. We have the Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, another bat virus. We have Ebola, which has emerged most likely from a fruit bat reservoir in Africa. We have the spread of Zika around the world, first identified in the 1940s in Africa, spreading to Asia, now to the Americas. We have a world of emerging and re-emerging pathogens that is part of globalization and part of the destabilization of nature occurring all over the world. It is a reflection of humans leaving or entering new ecological niches and coming into contact with new pathogens. And it strikes me that in this case, this pathogen traveled from Wuhan to Europe and the United States within hours. When we compare this pandemic, say, to the Black Death, the estimate is that the outbreak of bubonic plague started in Western China, just like this one, most likely, in 1331, and it took 16 years to reach Italy. This one took 16 hours because of our tightly interconnected world. So the concept that Ilaria puts forward to us is one of circular health, where health is not only about human beings, but is about health of nature, of biodiversity, health of animal populations, and health of the physical earth itself, and where we need a broader perspective if we are to have a healthy human population, but a healthy planet more generally. And this conforms well with other initiatives like One Health, which when we used to have a Centers for Disease Control in the United States, you may remember that historically before the Trump administration, we had a CDC. It actually did things. It was filled with scientists rather than political hacks. But it initiated in 2009 a One Health notion of interconnecting Earth health with human health because of the dangers of zoonotic events like the one we're living through today. And then the Lancet Planetary Health Commission, which reported in 2015, in November 2015, puts forward similarly a concept of planetary health, which is, again, Ilaria's broad concept that we need an integrated vision. We need NL thinking. Look it up. You'll get to it at the end of the book. We need networks of open science, of which she has also been a great global champion, in order to have the holistic framework that we need. And I will just end my remarks, introductory remarks, by saying that that holism, as she notes, is exactly the purpose of the Sustainable Development Goals, and very much part of the Paris Climate Agreement as well. It's our attempt to think holistically where human activity, economic activity, social life is embedded in physical Earth processes. And if we are to survive and to thrive, we need that holistic vision of a balanced world and a balanced humanity within the world. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. It's a very wonderful book and a very wonderful introduction to our current reality. Thanks, and back to you.
Thanks very much, Professor Sachs. That certainly gets us off to a great start. I'd like to invite now Professor Capua to please share a brief presentation on her book, Circular Health.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for your wonderful introduction. Thank you for finding the time to be here with us and obviously to share your thoughts, which are always very, very insightful. Now, can everybody see my screen? My first slide? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So as Jeffrey mentioned, the book actually wants to invite us to rethink health. And if you want to rethink something, you better look at what has been done before. And so the book starts approximately 2,500 years ago, when we had no data, no tools, and just a lot of thinking. and brings us to where we are today in an era of very big data in which we can do virtually anything, and tries to challenge the existing way that we approach health by looking at what happened in the past. So let's see what the ancient Greeks, how did they look at health? Well, funnily enough, they had at the center of health 3 words that are human, homo, annus, which means time, so what is happening at that time, and mundus, which means world, all the creatures of the world. But they also realized that other factors like the earth, water, air, and fire were absolutely important to drive our health. But to get to here, to where we are today, we need the help of some disruptive innovators. And I will just take 3 examples, some of them Jeffrey Sachs mentioned, on what disruptive innovation in 1500, what did that mean? And how did a disruptive innovator like Vesalio change a paradigm? And the paradigm was that anatomy was studied on books and not on bodies. And therefore, anatomy was, let's say, propagated in the community with some some things that were wrong. And also, it was very difficult to understand. And what he did was he brought art into science, brought perspective into science, and made that anatomy, which is the base of medicine, of course, and of physiology, it made it more accessible. He made it more accessible. This other guy here was a Dutch guy who invented the microscope, Antonie van Leeuwenhoek, and he actually thought that by inverting Galileo's lenses, he could see the invisibly small, which did not exist at the time because there was nothing to see it. And so basically, he spent all of his life, once he discovered the power of magnification, in magnifying everything he could find. And look at the wife, how she is looking at him, looking at all these the frog legs on his desk, and he drew everything he discovered. He drew sperm cells. These here on the top right are grains of sand. These here are the first protozoa that he identified, and he became a serial magnifier because this guy, who was a textile merchant, he had nothing to do with science. He wanted to see why some textiles were softer than others. He wanted to see it, not feel it. And that's why he started using his lenses and discovered a world that nobody had ever imagined. Another disruptive innovator was, of course, Jenner, who did the disgusting practice of taking organic material from an animal, there's the cow, and inoculating it into a child to protect the child from a human disease, which of course was smallpox. And the criticism, the obvious criticism, I mean, like, people are not like animals, and certainly they're not like cows, especially at that time in history. And look at the criticisms that his work was getting. Look at all the animals that are coming out of people's scars on this comic of the time. And so it's very, very difficult to break those silos and those barriers. And Jeffrey mentioned John Snow. John Snow was a disruptive innovator of the 1850s. What he did was he understood how cholera was working by pulling out a map, and nobody had thought about it. And that's how they discovered that certain diseases were waterborne. And this brings me to my final slides. So if we look back at what the ancient Greeks were imagining as health, and we bring it into modern times. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, just in case we forgot. And actually, this book was written before the pandemic. So it is very strange how that thinking, which was developed, let's say, before, is actually makes sense even more now that we have the pandemic. So what does this diagram show? This diagram shows that health is connected, we said, to products of the earth and to how we manage Earth, Mother Earth. It is also linked, of course, to water and everything that ends up in water, but also to air and to pollution and to climate and to what is happening around us, and of course to fire. The world is burning. I don't need to tell you that the world is burning, and everything that is burning is not burning in a healthy manner. Now, this is the take-home message that I have for you, colleagues and friends of the World Bank and of UF. We know that it's all interconnected, right? We know. I think there's no discussion that we are aware that if we continue kicking our amniotic sac, which is our environment and the context we live in, we are going to exterminate not only our species. And so what can we do? We can use the wealth of big data, which is being produced all the time. Each one of us is attached to 20 of these. And this pandemic is the pandemic that is being most measured, controlled, censored. We have data about everything. We just need to make that data, we need to make sure that it's reliable. We need to put it in a safe place, and we need to analyze it with new disruptive thinking, because this is what we can do. We can move forward health as a system. It's time. It's time. The pandemic has reset a lot of our systems, has reset a lot of our ways of thinking. We know that we should be co-advancing health of humans, animals, plants, and the environment, and we should be doing that in the direction of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the challenge I have for you is, can big data transform the way we look at health? Can we, similarly to what we have done over centuries, expand the concept of health? So it was the health of the spirit, it became health of the soul, spirit, body, and then mind. It was only added hundreds and hundreds of years after that. And now the question I'm asking you is, does it make sense that health, the definition of health, is only applied to one species? We have the data, and we understand that we live in a closed system and that we need to apply circularity. And this is my last slide, which tries to merge some of the silver lining that we have in the COVID pandemic. COVID is a catastrophe, but it is full of generative energy, and we must use that energy. And we can certainly push and expand on public health measures that we know that work, and we can bring this into our future. We must bring this in the post-pandemic era. It has forced us to conduct a real-life experiment. Nobody would have been able to stop the world. Jeffrey Sachs, lots of people are talking about sustainability, but stopping the world would have been impossible. Well, we've done it. We've done it, and we know that nature is here. Nature is telling us that if we fix a few things, nature will kick back, and we can regain years and years that we would have lost towards sustainability. And between the time that this book was written and now, One Health is leading an initiative to do exactly what was in that previous slide. We are trying to make very interdisciplinary groups, highly interdisciplinary groups, converge around the concept of health, so that we can start looking at a real open access scientific environment to fix real life problems. So thank you very much. And it was a real pleasure to be able to share these thoughts with you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Capua. You've certainly given us a lot to think about and digest. So we're going to move now into the discussion segment of the event. We're joined by 4 colleagues from the World Bank. Richard Damania is the chief economist in the Sustainable Development Vice Presidency. Roberta Gatti is the chief economist in the Human Development Global Practice. Miria Pigato is the lead economist in the Macroeconomic Trade and Investment Global Practice, and Franck Berthe is the senior livestock specialist in the Agriculture and Food Global Practice. So to get us started, let's begin with Richard.
Thank you so much, David. So let me begin firstly by thanking Miria, who organized this, of course, Ilaria, for a wonderful book and for bringing this together, and Jeff for your incisive comments. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I would really like to commend everyone to read the book. It's written in a Socratic method with questions and answers, and there's an immense amount to learn from the book. So what do we learn? What is one of the key messages? We've heard this now a couple of times, but let me reinforce it. The key message of this book is it's about interconnectedness. And the metaphor and the geometry of a circle and the circular economy and circular health, which is the title of this book, is really quite appropriate, because what it does is it automatically takes our gaze into the need for balance. And with balance comes the need also for policies that allow for the balancing. And as we heard from Jeffrey, what we're seeing, of course, with COVID is that we are mired in the midst of a zoonotic disease. And this, like so many other zoonotic disease, is a spillover from wild animals into humans. If you believe the science and the data, on average, we get 1 to 2 such zoonotics spilling over from wild animals into humans a year. And every 10 years or so, one of these will become really nasty, and we'll notice it, like HIV, MERS, SARS, Nipah virus, and so on. And of course, as we've heard, and let's re-emphasize the point, is that what this reflects is an imbalance between nature and the economy. There's a whole lot of economists online, so let me put it in a different way. What it reflects is an imbalance between natural capital, human capital, and physical capital. And of course, when you've got things that are connected, as this book emphasizes, and when you have an imbalance, then destroying natural capital to build, say, human or physical capital is going to have consequences. It's going to spill over. And one fine example of a spillover, which you would not want to repeat, is, of course, the COVID pandemic. But it's not the only one. You know, we hear a lot about climate change. So let me not talk about climate change, because everyone over here knows all about it. If we can think of other aspects of air pollution, something like PM 2.5, again, if you believe the science and the scientists, the Lancet Commission on Health and Pollution suggested that we lose more lives to air pollution each year than we do to wars and violence. And yet we pay more attention and spend more money, quite rightly, on preventing wars and violence, rather than trying to address the problems of air pollution and PM 2.5. Take another example, nitrogen. Nitrogen pollution is widespread, and it's growing even in rich countries, and certainly in poorer countries of this world. If you believe the scientists, we've crossed the safe planetary boundaries for nitrogen. To some, like some of the scientists studying this at the University of Minnesota, they claim this is the largest global externality, larger even than carbon dioxide. And the reason why they say this is because of the health impacts on things like stunting, blue baby syndrome, and of course cancers, as well as the environmental impacts, the algal blooms we see in water, and of course the other effects that we see in terms of air pollution. So what all of this is just some examples of very many we could point to of signs of imbalances between natural capital and the other forms of capital. And it's also a sign that we are not actually growing our economies in the way that we need to and that we should. So when the rubber hits the ground and we encounter problems such as COVID, what we seem to find is that people always and policies always seem to focus on the cure, on the symptoms of the problem. How can we stop the spread of COVID? And what we're seeing, regrettably, in so very many countries is less attention given to what we think about as the presumed causes and prevention rather than the cure. And this is true also for so much that we see generally in health. The focus is increasingly on trying to cure the problems rather than trying to tackle the symptoms. And this is why one of the things we try to emphasize so heavily in the work that we're actually doing is the need to build more sustainably, is the need to build a more resilient economy, and indeed tied to all of this is the need for inclusion and equity, because without it, we know we're going to get another kind of imbalance between highly unequal distributions of income and everything else that actually happens. So let me end over here with a kind of a big question to Ilaria. The One Health approach quite rightly asks us to look at the entire circle, the entirety of everything from cause to symptom. But when you speak to a government in reality, they'll tell you, you know what, I have a limited budget. So the focus is always on the here and now and on the cure rather than the prevention. So, for example, today we see deforestation rates are roughly about 60 to 70% higher than they were a year ago. There is no sign that PM 2.5 is actually declining. We see many countries reversing, for example, their policies on energy efficiency. These are all indications that you're focusing on the symptoms. You need the money rather than the fundamental cause, which is ostensibly an imbalance and a lack of sustainability. So how do we manage those trade-offs? Indeed, we all know that we should, but actually getting it there is a difficult one. With that, let me end. Thank you again, Ilaria. It was a wonderful read and also a wonderful talk. And Jeffrey, you too. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for this articulated question. Okay, let me start from COVID. So what is COVID telling us? What is COVID screaming in our face? COVID is telling us that the system that we live in moves at a speed which cannot manage epidemic or a pandemic or a viral spread of this proportion. The system does not have enough flexibility, okay? So going back to COVID, which I think is in our hearts, and I think it's an example which makes sense, I would say COVID is, one of the biggest problems with COVID is that it's not behaving the same everywhere, which on one hand is good, but on the other hand confuses people. Now, COVID is behaving differently in certain cities. And I think that those are the questions that we have to answer now, okay? Because when there will, as the waves continue, the fragilities that were highlighted in the first wave will probably still be there. And so when I talk about circular health, I also include prevention, which is not necessarily, as you would say, you know, how do we do prevention in stopping this virus from exiting the forest? Okay, so that's another story. But the prevention that I am thinking about is like tailored on cities. So what if we take out the cities out of COVID, some cities at least, it is something that is much more manageable, right? Much more manageable. And so I think that the great challenges we have is empowering those cities to react to those fragilities now for the next wave, to prevent that we slip again and that we hit those numbers. So this is one domain of interdisciplinarity that is there, and we just need to work on it. But going back to preventing spillover, so preventing spillover is, I think, more and more difficult. What we can do is implement rapid reaction, very rapid reaction. But this depends a lot on what country this happens in. And so this particular emergency happened in China, and the reaction wasn't as fast. And just on January 1st, 175,000 people left Wuhan, and the new year, the Lunar New Year didn't help. So that's certainly one thing that we need to do. But I would like to bring this whole concept one step beyond, which is that healthcare systems, particularly in Europe, are unsustainable at the moment. So we all know, those that have national healthcare systems, we all know that as the population ages, these systems cannot sustain themselves, and something is going to change, but nobody wants to let this go. And so here's where circular health comes in. So for lay people, if, let's say, I have diabetes in the family, and my mother was turned diabetic when she was 50, that is a cost, of course, on healthcare, and is an ugly life for my mom. My objective, and the big data environment and convergence needs is essential for me to reduce those risk factors so that I get sick when I'm 70 and I am saving 20 years on that healthcare system. And so how can I know all these little bits of personalized medicine, but also personalized public health, right? I can do this, and I can refine my risk factors by looking at big data, because there's a lot of people that are very similar to me. And so that's where prevention really comes in. It's about rethinking exactly what you were saying. There's more people that die of pollution than of whatever else, right? So how can we leverage this immense wealth of data to do exactly what you were suggesting? This is the challenge.
Thank you. Roberta Gatti, our Chief Economist from Human Development, let's go to you next.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Professor Capua, Ilaria, for this incredibly thought-provoking presentation and opportunities for us to reflect. I have to confess that I am a physical book reader, and I haven't been able to get my hands yet on your book, but I look forward to it. So to prepare for this talk, I went to your website and I listened to one of your talks on One Health. And indeed, you were touching upon some of these issues that we are discussing today. And I was particularly taken by the fact that the One Health concept is not only One Health in the interface between humans and animals, but is really in the interconnectedness of life, particularly as it is lived today. And you gave a very good example. You talked about SARS and how isolated from CVET, it moved to the ARI system of some hotel in Hong Kong. And at that point, I was like, oh, why isn't she talking about COVID-19? And that's when I looked at the timestamp of that video, and it was from February 2019. So in a way, probably we owe you an award for clairvoyance, but there's also probably the truth that scientists were talking about this, and this was a fact. And if we look back, Professor Sachs and both you and Richard referenced, HIV, Ebola, SARS, these waves of diseases, and nobody really listened. Or maybe they listened and they didn't have the right incentives to act, or maybe even somebody had the right incentive to act, but not everybody who needed to act did it. Now, I wanted to build on the optimistic part of your presentation, which I find really contagious, pun intended. There's, in a way, we know the crises are a window of opportunity to potentially get things right. In the economics literature, we know that there is evidence that reform follows crisis more often than not, we hope. But for example, even in health, there is evidence that the extension of health coverage is mostly associated with episodes of reconstruction after a war, democratization, movement from fragility to non-fragility. There are some key events that really unbolt the system from inertia to change. And we know that when these events happen, things can get better. And we saw, for example, that the countries that suffer from more deeply from SARS in 2004 were the ones that were better prepared to contain COVID-19 when it came along, including through test and tracing. So if we have an opportunity to act, I was thinking your work and the One Health concept is really broad. And your work and your studies point at the interconnectedness of many elements. And I'm just reading them out here, just a selection. The growth of megacities, higher amount of waste, labor exploitation and inequality, displacement of people, displacement of animals from their natural habitats. All of these contribute to increase the risk of pandemics. And now we see that they also contribute to make the consequences of a pandemic much deeper. You spoke about the power of data, and as somebody who's devoting a lot of her life to measurement, I really believe in that. But we had lots of data going around for quite a while, and we even see that during this pandemic it's not even being used efficiently or as efficiently as possible. I would like to push our conversation a little bit to something very practical. Assume that even data is being used well, but then how would a country, a developing country or a developed country, know where to start? Should we start from looking at the animal to human? Should we start from thinking through the economic incentives of economic inequality? Should we think about urban development? Where to start first, and where could be the sort of engine for that change that we hope will happen with this crisis? With many thanks for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you very much, Roberta Gatti, for your ideas and your questions. I've taken 3 points, and I will try and summarize some ideas. Okay, the first one is, you say that, rightly so, that we've been talking about this pandemic forever, right? So all of you of the World Bank and everybody, knows that this was a threat. Okay, it was a threat, but in fact, personally, I think that the fact that the 2009 influenza pandemic was so mild took the pressure off the hook. And number two, the scientific community, the virologist community, and I am not one of them, I actually was one of them, but I am guilty, number one, we had not planned for a pandemic from an unknown virus, okay? We had only planned for an influenza pandemic. So, okay, now why hadn't we planned? Because many scientists like myself, people like Franck, Berthe, who is listening to us, and have been in many, many talks and instances saying, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. Bill Gates said, this is gonna happen, okay? So not only us, right? And nobody believed us. Nobody believed us. And I wanna make a point that, you know why it's so difficult? Because nobody cares about success stories. So we have not had a pandemic of bird flu. H5N1, which I'm sure that a lot of you remember, has not become a pandemic. And you know why? Because there are lots of people like myself at the time, and Franck, Berthe, and others who were there, who were working on it, and have set up a series of mitigation strategies. So basically, how can you sell something that is a success if it's not going to happen? Okay, but we have to learn from that, and this goes back to data sharing and another point that you mentioned was the importance of data, and I would add the importance of data sharing. So in the following the 2006 bird flu pre-pandemic condition, there were a series of databases that were developed to collect the viral sequences. And this was a very, very contentious issue at the time. And I actually led that effort. And those databases that exist now are the products of that crisis. There is one database in particular that has most sequences and that has, I think, 150,000 created that infrastructure. Then we wouldn't have it now, and everything would be so more difficult. And this brings me to the last point I want to make, which is this is a transformational event. I mean, as you said, we are going to have to rebuild. We are going to have to rethink. We are going to have to reinvent. Transformational events have destructive energy, but they have generative energy. And now is the moment to start thinking on how we can use that generative energy to be in a better place in 10 years' time, not only with reference to the pandemic, but because the pandemic has broken so many systems, we can try and find some new ways forward.
Thank you very much. We're going to move over now to Miria Pigato from the Macroeconomic Trade and Investment Global Practice. Miria.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Ilaria, for a great, inspiring presentation. I go directly to my question because I want to leave some time for Franck and possibly other questions. So, I'm a macroeconomist, so I'm kind of used to look at the macroeconomics of whatever question is in front of me. So I would like to hear your views on a well-known paradox. On one side, humans are now doing much better than in the past, particularly in developing countries. And this is in terms of general health, improvements in malnutrition, infant and child mortality rates, life expectancies everywhere. In contrast, the natural world is not doing well at all. In fact, it is falling apart. So one of the key points of your book is that ecosystems and human health are deeply interconnected, and I truly believe that this is true. But why are we observing declining ecosystem services on the one hand and improving health and well-being on the other? And it could be because we are just not measuring one or the other very well, or it could be because we are just at the beginning. And if we add another 2 or 3 billions of humans, we really reach the natural barriers of the planet. And so everything will collapse. I don't know the answer. The kind of follow-up is on the COVID. I think there has been a lot of sharing of data of scientists that have put their heads together trying to find a solution. I don't think it has ever happened before. But on the other hand, there has also been a lot of competition for finding the vaccine, and you have the developers, those who put the funds, on the group of scientists that that want to have a solution. So again, you have the economics here, which is on one side, I think what counts most is the emergence of this atmosphere where everybody is working together and it's interconnected for, you know, common solution or the competition, which is really the essence of the economic system we are living on.
Thank you, Miria. And I will, because I'm talking to the economists, I will actually start from the end. And what I will say is that, okay, I think that we understood that we cannot only fund work on emerging diseases after the emerging disease has emerged, okay? Because after is going to be late. Whether it's too late or not is not under our control. And so here, as a person who is not in the virology business anymore, because I am now doing something completely different, but I pray, keep laboratories working with emerging diseases funded all the time. Because you know why we weren't ready for a vaccine? Because funding for coronavirus vaccine finished 10 years after SARS. And so that's why we don't have a coronavirus vaccine. On this, I would like to go back to competition or sharing. Okay, in a situation like this, I don't think there should be any competition because, like, so you know much better than I do, but the world is sort of going bankrupt, right? And so what are we competing? The more it takes, the more money we are going to burn, okay? Because people can't go back to work. So my vision, which is the same vision I had in 2006, is we need to work beforehand, we need to share, and we need to prepare some prototype vaccines, have them ready. But this requires an enormous investment. I mean, it's not peanuts, but if we don't, this is the result. So I don't know if we can take another one of these. So I think that rather than competition, there should be an investment in times of peace to pre-develop vaccine candidates and therapeuticals candidates and have that funding going. Because if not, we do an oops, and this is what happens. So I would like to go back to your first point, and I'm going to be very short. While humans are thriving and natural world is falling apart, I think that I don't think we know that our generation is consuming 1.5 times the resources that it is entitled to. This needs to stop, and we need to invert this trend. And another point I would like to make is that what is acceptable to our generation is not acceptable to our kids' generation. And so we need to start fixing things for them from an environmental point of view and a relationship with the animals that we eat, the water that we drink, and everything that surrounds us.
Thank you. And now we'll move to Franck Berthe from the Agriculture and Food Global Practice. Franck.
Thanks a lot. And thanks, Ilaria, for this brilliant presentation. Thanks for your book. And thanks for tirelessly waving this One Health flag, reminding us about this connection between people, animals, and the planet. I'll try to be brief, but I want to go back to the book, which I enjoyed very much, and certainly this historical perspective that you take on health as a concept and health as an object of scientific investigation, and how scientific progress has gradually led to what you call this verticalization of health. And I find it interesting that this very same progress, and today we would talk about gene editing, brain mapping, single cell analysis, is now finishing to verticalize health to somewhat an extreme point. And I think now to precision medicine, for example. And at the same time, what you show is that this very progress, and now I'm talking about big data, artificial intelligence, opens avenues to circularize health. And it's, I think, another paradox that you describe in your book, and this is the bright side to the Promethean fate that you describe along this history of science, and a sort of happy ending. So thanks for the optimism, and yes, it is contagious. Something I would like to say is that it's good that we look at ourselves, the bank, and how over time we have embraced a cross-sectorial approach with great success. Remember the river blindness in the 70s, our One Health response to avian flu in the 2000s, and since then the post-Ebola operations that we deploy in West and Central Africa, and of course more recently our response to COVID-19. And in fact, the bank is a natural home to One Health, because it is multi-sectoral, it's multilateral, multi-regional, and multidimensional. So there again, I mean, I see a lot of reasons to optimism that things can change. I would like to come back to this list of outbreaks that we've heard today: the avian flu, SARS, Ebola, COVID. This recent history of outbreaks is probably a history of collective failure, failure to respond, certainly, and even more importantly, failure to prevent those outbreaks, and this is something that has been I think in our discussion today. But I would like to hear about how we have perpetuated this cycle of panic and neglect that we both have witnessed over the years, and how do you see us not losing the momentum this time, and maybe finish the job? Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a cycle of denial and neglect, and but what I think was substantially wrong with the previous system is that it was geared all towards after the pandemic the virus had emerged, and therefore that's why it was a story of a continuous and self-perpetuating difficulty, because at a certain point things get out of control with diseases, and we are seeing it. I would like to say on the back of your ideas a couple of things. The first one is that we have a unique opportunity now to, because people are interested in health, they're interested in being, and I will add a little, like, this is the backside of populism. So populism means 1 = 1, but from a health perspective, 1 = 1 means I want to be active in my own health. And this is an opportunity which COVID has magnified and represents, I think, a very important aspect that as a One Health community, we have not been able to do well enough with, which is citizen science. There's so much that can be done by empowering citizens who now are connected, and they want to do things which concern their own health. I would like to give you a funny example. We are working with a group, a foundation, which is called Penta, on a questionnaire for adolescents on their sexual health, because we wanted to know how they feel about the information they get, how they feel about their gender identity, how they feel about the information sources where they learn about diseases and illness. And this was given out to some schools. They got 200 questionnaires, and then it got in the hands of an influencer. They got 11,000 questionnaires in 24 hours. and they crash the server. But those questionnaires are real because these are real people who want to communicate some needs, and that can be incredibly powerful. So that is, I think, a very positive aspect of our moment, but this is the first time that we are dealing with a health emergency of these proportions in the fake news environment. And so we are dealing with two epidemics. So compared to when we were running around with bird flu, now there is another layer, which is what is happening in the infosphere, because what is happening up there is influencing what is happening down here. And there is where we need to go. There is the additional challenge that I think, let's say, the medical and biomedical environment is not getting. That component is only a part, the health management, of how this epidemic will play out. And of course, the digital environment is a major driver, major. And so we have to take advantage of this. But I think that the time is right. We have never had so much attention on these issues. So we should go for it.
Excellent, thank you. We're actually about 3 minutes over time, but I just wanted to invite Professor Capua, if you have any final thoughts to leave us with before we sign off.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, Miria, Pigato, for having organized this. And thank you to the colleagues of the World Bank. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to see my friend Franck, Berthe again. And I just want to say that, you know, our generation is in this. We have the ideas, we have the mindset. We just need to get ourselves together and be ambitious in the ideas that we want to move forward, because the time is right and crises should never be wasted. So thanks again, and stay safe.
Thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to have had you here with us today. Thank you to our four discussants and to Professor Sachs for his opening remarks. This concludes today's event. So thank you everyone for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Grazie.